No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains, Chapter 10. Winter had come and gone, and Rosie was almost part of the Gartside farmhouse furniture. She spent so much time under their roof. Sometimes her mother accompanied her, sometimes Grandad, and sometimes both. But increasingly she visited on her own. The long Easter school holidays of 1990 were no different, and on Friday the 6th of April she disembarked from the bus in Hayfield and was walking up the Kinder Road, eager to meet up with Connie, Titch and Ralph. It was one of those lovely spring afternoons with a slight westerly wind. The sky was clear and the leaves were in bud as she crunched gravel and eventually made her way onto the winding track up to Colwell Clough. As she trudged uphill, she could hear the burbling brook tumbling and falling over its rock-strewn bed below and to her right, and the bleating of sheep on the opposite hillside. The track narrowed, and she was under a lace-work canopy of trees lining both sides, the steep-sided banking in their shade a vivid azure carpet of nodding bluebells. "Aha, gotcha!" Connie emerged from behind a tree, her face illuminated by her smile. Overcoming her initial surprise, Rosie laughed. "How long have you been there?" "Ages. You're late. You've been dawdling." "How's your mother?" "She's fine, except she's fussing about like a mother hen. She's 3 people staying this weekend. You're going to have to share my room again." "How awful," Rosie responded, pulling her face in mock distaste. "You'd better not put your leg under my bedclothes like you did last time." "It's a lovely leg, Rosie, far better than the old one. I'm practising for school sports day. Mikey Grimsditch thinks he's still the fastest runner in our class, but he's in for a surprise this year." As if to prove her point, she set off up the road, Rosie desperately trying to keep up with her. They crested the hill by the farm gate neck and neck. Ralph was perched atop it. Titch appeared and ran to greet them, jumping up at Rosie in delight. She knelt down to fondle his ears, and he licked her face to show his appreciation. "Did you have a good journey, Rosie?" "Yes, thanks, Ralph." She looked up at him. His face broke into a smile and his teeth flashed white against the background of his brown face. It struck her all of a sudden. He was quite a handsome lad. She returned his smile, and he jumped down. "Let me take your rucksack. You must be tired." She slipped it off her shoulder and handed it to him. They were just about to make their way around the side of the cow byre to access the yard and the kitchen door, when they were attracted by the sound of nailed boots advancing towards them. 2 men were coming down the track, both dressed in greeny-brown camouflage jackets and trousers. Ralph frowned and leant back, lounging against the stone wall as they passed, deep in conversation. Then he walked out into the lane, as if to see which way they went, and then came back. "What's the matter, Ralph?" Connie asked, sensing her big brother was worried about something. "Let's get round the back. They're both keepers, and I reckon they're up to no good. I want to see where they're going." They did as he asked, but when they reached the yard, Mrs. Gartside was collecting her washing off the line. "Hi, young Rosie. How are you?" "Great, Mrs. Gartside. Can I help?" Without waiting for an answer, she began to pull a sheet off the line, and the farmer's wife helped her fold it, before placing it in the wicker basket with the rest. Meanwhile, Ralph and his sister were peering into the distance, both leaning against the dry stone wall. "Thanks, Rosie, love. Come inside, we'll have a brew." The woman and the girl made their way into the kitchen. Old Mr. Gartside was slumped in his favourite armchair by the fire, a newspaper on his lap, and fast asleep, judging by his intermittent soft snuffling snores. They'd already made the brew by the time Ralph and Connie entered. Ralph looked across at his father. Rosie thought he was going to say something to him, but he hesitated and then turned away, obviously reluctant to wake him. Eventually Mrs. Gartside gave her husband a prod, and summoned all to the table for their evening meal. She told them that her paying guests had only booked bed and breakfast, and had informed her they'd be dining in the George in Hayfield that evening. Mr. Gartside nodded, and suggested he might look into converting the barn for self-catering accommodation, pointing out another farmer in Barber Booth was doing the same. Throughout the meal, Ralph remained unusually quiet, and after they'd finished, he'd refused a cup of tea and seemed increasingly restive. In fact, at the first opportunity, he said he had someone to see, donned his jacket, and was out the door before anybody could query what he was in such a hurry for. Titch seized his opportunity and followed him. It wasn't until Rosie and Connie were alone in the bedroom, getting undressed, that the younger girl brought up the subject that had troubled Ralph earlier. By then it was raining hard, drops rattling against the window panes in noisy gusts, as if somebody was throwing small pebbles against the glass to annoy them. The wind had got up and was howling round the farmhouse. The old tree at the back of the house, almost adjacent to their window, creaked ominously as it swayed under its influence. Connie informed Rosie that a pair of peregrine falcons had returned for a second year, to rebuild their nest on a gritstone outcrop near the Kinder Downfall, above the Mermaid's Pool. Evidently, the raptors were still fairly rare in the area, having been persecuted, along with all other falcons and hawks, since the land was enclosed. Ralph had found a dead raven near the same site only the previous Wednesday. He thought it had been poisoned, perhaps accidentally, by insecticide. But when he'd seen the two keepers in camouflage and noticed they'd struck off across open land towards the Mermaid's Pool, his suspicions had been aroused. Poisoning and trapping ravens and raptors was common in the areas where land was reserved for game, although the birds were supposed to be protected by the law. Last year, Father found a goshawk's nest scattered around the base of a tree. Somebody had climbed up it and taken the complete nest. "That's terrible," Rosie responded. "Yes, and there were 3 eggs, all smashed next to it." So that's where Ralph was going. I thought he rushed his tea, and he never said a word before he put on his jacket and left in such a hurry. Yes, he's gone to check on the nest. But why should anybody want to harm the birds? Sheer ignorance and prejudice, that's what Ralph says. The keepers see the raptors as a threat to their blessed grouse. Sometimes they'll take a chick or even their eggs, but they only do it to live. They have to eat the same as any creature. The keepers guard the grouse so that gangs of boys with sticks can beat the moor and drive them to where the gentry are waiting behind their hides to blast them out of the sky with their double-barreled shotguns. She smiled wryly at Rosie. They call it sport. Ralph calls it butchery, and the people who do it spineless cowards and chinless wonders. He loves birds. In fact, he loves all wild things. If he ever catches a keeper, or anybody else for that matter, harming any wild thing, well, I'd hate to be in their boots. "He's a really lovely boy," Rosie said, as she climbed into bed and snuggled under the blanket. Connie gave her a knowing look, before saying, "Good night, sleep tight," as she switched off the bedside light. "Watch the bugs don't bite," responded Rosie. Both girls were soon in the land of Nod, dreaming their distinctive dreams. Rosie found herself standing in a shaft of sunlight on a jagged rock, looking down at the Mermaid's Pool, its surface partially shrouded in a milky white mist. A gigantic bird with a curved yellow beak and piercing black and gold eyes suddenly appeared, flying out of the pool in a great shower of spray. At first she thought it carried a mermaid on its back, but when she looked again, she realized that what she'd assumed was a fishtail stretched along its tail feathers, was in fact a single slender leg, coated in tiny water droplets, glistening silver for all the world like shiny scales. The girl turned and smiled at her and waved. She had distinctive green eyes and long carroty red hair floating about her head and face in the warm fresh spring breeze, like a banner of defiance or of revolution.